I'm posting here because I need outside perspective before I do something irreversible. I'm not proud of how calm I was when it happened, and that scares me more than the rage ever could. For context, my name's Ethan Miller, 38M. My wife is Lauren Miller, 35F. We've been married for 11 years. No kids. Suburban life. Mortgage. Shared passwords. The whole American middle-class starter kit. I thought we were solid. Not perfect, but real. Arguments about money, schedules, her needing space. Nothing that screamed she's replacing you. The first crack showed up months ago, subtle enough that I ignored it. Lauren started correcting me in public, laughing at me instead of with me. She guarded her phone like it contained nuclear codes. She started calling me controlling whenever I asked basic questions. Where she was going, why she was suddenly working late 3 nights a week at a job that had never required overtime before. Classic red flags, right? I know that now. Back then, I told myself I was being paranoid. That's what she told me too. Repeatedly. With that practiced, irritated sigh like I was exhausting her. The night everything snapped, I came home early because my meeting got canceled. No warning text. No dramatic entrance. Just me pulling into my own driveway and freezing. There was a black SUV parked crookedly near the curb. New. Expensive. The kind of car you don't accidentally buy. The engine was running. Lauren was inside it. She was in the passenger seat, turned toward the driver, smiling in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Hand on his arm. Comfortable. Intimate. Like the world outside that car didn't exist. Before I could even process that image, 2 men stepped into my path as I walked toward my house. Big guys. Not gym brothers. More like, we don't ask questions, energy. One of them said, very casually, "You should turn around, man." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my brain was short-circuiting. Then the driver stepped out of the SUV. Mark Reynolds, as I'd later learn. Mid-40s. Tailored jacket. Smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked at me like I was an inconvenience. "Lauren's coming with me," he said. "Her stuff's already packed. You're not part of her future." Lauren finally looked at me then. No guilt. No fear. Just annoyance. Like I'd shown up late to something she'd already decided. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't ask why. Because suddenly, all the little lies lined up perfectly in my head. And that's when I understood something that still keeps me awake at night. She didn't just cheat on me. She planned to erase me. That realization didn't hurt the way betrayal is supposed to. It hardened something inside me instead. So yeah, that's where I'm at. After they left, after the SUV disappeared down the street, and the 2 guys melted away like they'd never existed, I didn't chase them. I didn't collapse. I didn't even sit down. I stood in my empty driveway for a long time, staring at the oil stain where the SUV had been parked, feeling something dangerously close to clarity. The house was silent when I walked in. Too clean. Too organized. Drawers half empty. Closet doors open like mouths that had already said their piece. Lauren hadn't packed in a rush. This was surgical. She'd been preparing for weeks. Maybe months. That's when I stopped asking what happened and started asking how long. I did what any emotionally compromised, sleep-deprived guy with decent tech skills and a lot to lose would do. I started digging. First stop was the trash. I know that sounds pathetic, but desperation has a way of sharpening instincts. Under coffee grounds and junk mail, I found a crumpled receipt from a hotel 20 minutes away. 2 glasses of wine. Dinner for 2. A weekday afternoon. I checked our shared credit card app. She'd been careful, mostly cash, prepaid cards. But people always get sloppy when they think they're smarter than you. 3 charges stood out. A jewelry store I'd never been to. A boutique gym. A private storage unit. Storage unit. That one hit differently. I drove there the next morning. Didn't even shower. Just threw on yesterday's clothes and followed the address. The clerk was young, bored, and way too trusting when I showed him my wedding ring and said, "My wife forgot the unit number." Unit 317. Inside were boxes labeled in Lauren's handwriting. Winter, documents, personal. I opened the last one. Passports. Copies. Not just hers, mine too. Bank statements. Photos of Mark and her together. Vacation selfies she'd told me were work trips. And at the bottom of the box, like the punchline to a sick joke, was a manila folder. Inside, a handwritten list titled Exit Plan. I'm not exaggerating. She actually wrote it like that. Bullet points. Dates. Notes about timing the confrontation. A line that said, Ethan won't fight back if he's confused. Another that read, Mark says intimidation works. That's when the anger finally showed up, but it wasn't loud. It was quiet, focused, cold. I confronted her that night. She answered my call like nothing was wrong. What do you want, Ethan? She snapped. I asked her how long she'd been lying to my face. She laughed. Actually laughed. Then she said, you always overthink. This is why I had to leave. When I mentioned the storage unit, the line went silent. Then she tried to spin it. Said Mark was helping her escape a toxic situation. Said I was emotionally absent. Said I'd driven her into someone else's arms. Classic rewrite. Victim cosplay. I told her I'd found the exit plan. She hung up. That's when I knew. This wasn't just infidelity. This was strategy. And if she'd planned this carefully, then she'd made one critical miscalculation. She assumed I'd stay the man she betrayed. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was spiraling, but because my brain wouldn't shut off. Once you realize you've been living inside someone else's script, you stop reacting emotionally and start reading the margins. The name Mark Reynolds kept looping in my head. The way he stood in my driveway. The way Lauren deferred to him without even noticing she was doing it. That wasn't new love chemistry. That was alignment. Like they'd rehearsed their roles. So I did what Lauren never thought I would. I researched him. Turns out Mark Reynolds wasn't just some rich guy with a luxury SUV and a savior complex. He was a senior partner at a regional real estate investment firm. Mid-level powerful. Not untouchable, but used to people backing down when he flexed. Divorced twice. One quiet settlement. One loud NDA. That alone told me everything I needed to know about how he handled conflict. I also learned something else that made my jaw tighten. Lauren hadn't just been sleeping with him. She'd been working for him. That late overtime, she'd been logging. Consulting work. Off the books. Payments routed through a shell LLC. She wasn't just cheating. She was entangling our lives financially in ways that could have destroyed me if things went wrong. And they almost did. I pulled our joint bank records going back 2 years. Small transfers at first, then larger ones. Always just under the threshold that would trigger alerts. She was moving money out slowly, methodically, testing how asleep I was at the wheel. That's when the fear finally hit. Not panic, but something sharper. If I'd confronted her emotionally instead of paying attention, I'd already be broke, gaslit, and painted as unstable. I realized something terrifying. The men in my driveway weren't there just to scare me. They were there to set the tone, to make sure I didn't ask questions, to make sure I didn't look back. And that's when I made a decision I haven't told anyone in my real life. I stopped trying to save my marriage. Instead, I started protecting my name. I called a lawyer the next morning. Not a divorce attorney, yet. A financial litigation specialist. I didn't tell him everything. Just enough. He went quiet halfway through and said, do not confront her again. Do not warn her. If what you're saying is accurate, you need to move faster than she expects. So I did. I froze accounts she didn't know I still controlled. I documented everything. Screenshots. Call logs. Metadata. I backed it up in 3 places. I started writing timelines like a detective, not a husband. Lauren texted me that night. First message since hanging up. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Mark can make things very uncomfortable for you. Just sign the papers when they come. That text told me everything. She wasn't scared. She was confident. And confidence like that doesn't come from love. It comes from believing the other person is already beaten. Lauren showed up at the house 3 days later like she still belonged there. No warning. No text. Just her key in the lock at 7:12 p.m. The same way she used to come home before everything split open. I was in the kitchen, drinking coffee I didn't need, listening to the sound of my own breathing like it was the only thing anchoring me to the room. She walked in confident, controlled, dressed sharp, like this was a business meeting, not the wreckage of an 11-year marriage. We need to talk, she said, already annoyed. You're freezing accounts. That's illegal. I didn't turn around right away. Let the silence work. Let her feel the imbalance. When I finally faced her, she flinched, not because I looked angry, but because I didn't look anything. I froze what I'm legally allowed to freeze, I said, which tells me you've been spending money you knew wasn't yours. She rolled her eyes. God, she always did that when she thought she had the upper hand. Ethan, don't do this, she said. You're emotional. You're embarrassed. I get it. But Mark's lawyers are already drafting paperwork. This can be clean if you don't make it ugly. There it was. The script again. Calm tone. Implied threat. positioning herself as reasonable while quietly warning me of consequences. I asked her one question. How long were you planning to disappear? She paused. Just half a second too long. Then she lied. Disappear? I told you I was leaving. People fall out of love. That doesn't make me a villain. I walked past her into the living room and picked up a folder from the table. Thick. Organized. Labeled. I set it down between us. Exit plan, I said. Your handwriting. Your dates. Your notes. The color drained from her face. Not all at once, but in waves. Then the mask snapped back on. You went through my things, she snapped. That's a violation. I almost laughed. You had 2 men block my front door and threaten to put me in the hospital, I said. You lost the moral high ground somewhere around that sentence. She crossed her arms. Defensive now. Angry. You don't understand what Mark can do, she said quietly. You think this is about feelings? This is about power. He's protecting me. That word, protecting, hit me harder than any insult. You didn't need protection, I said. You needed honesty. She scoffed. Honesty? You checked out years ago. You were predictable. Safe. I needed more. And there it was. The justification she'd been rehearsing. The narrative where her betrayal was actually growth and my trust was a weakness. I leaned closer. You planned to confuse me. To intimidate me. To move money and documents like I wouldn't notice, I said. That's not leaving a marriage. That's dismantling a person. For the first time, her confidence cracked. You're overreacting, she said, but her voice wasn't steady anymore. You always do this, turn things into something bigger. No, I replied. This is the first time I'm seeing things exactly as they are. She grabbed her purse, shaking now, angry at herself for it. This isn't over, she said. Mark won't let it be. I nodded. Calm. Certain. I know, I said. That's why I'm ready. She left without another word. And the moment the door closed, I realized something chillingly clear. Lauren wasn't scared because she'd been caught. She was scared because for the first time, she didn't know what I was going to do next. Mark didn't wait long to make his move. 2 days after Lauren stormed out of the house, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Experience had already taught me that silence unsettles people who are used to control. The voicemail was calm, polite, almost friendly. Ethan, this is Mark Reynolds. I think we should talk like adults. There's no need for things to get adversarial. That pause before adversarial? Not accidental. I didn't call back. Instead, an hour later, I received an email from a law firm I'd never heard of. Subject line, notice of intent. It accused me of financial misconduct, emotional instability, and this one made my hands go cold, creating an unsafe domestic environment for Lauren. There it was. The pivot. They weren't just trying to divorce me. They were trying to define me. I forwarded everything to my attorney. He called me within minutes. They're bluffing, he said, but it's an aggressive bluff. They're trying to scare you into signing before discovery. Discovery. That word mattered. Because discovery meant everything Lauren and Mark had done would be dragged into daylight. And daylight was the one thing they hadn't planned for. That night, Lauren texted me again. You didn't have to ignore him. Mark was trying to be fair. If you keep pushing, this will get ugly. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. It already is. That's when things escalated from legal pressure to something more personal. The next morning, my access badge at work didn't scan. HR called me in for a conversation. Someone, very helpfully, had submitted an anonymous complaint suggesting I'd been unstable lately, distracted, possibly dealing with substance issues. I don't drink. I don't use drugs. But allegations don't have to be true to be damaging. They just have to exist. As I sat there, listening to HR's careful, rehearsed language, something clicked into place. This wasn't Mark protecting Lauren. This was Mark erasing obstacles. And I was the last one. That afternoon, I finally called Mark back. He answered on the first ring. Ethan, he said smoothly. Glad you came around. I want you to listen very carefully, I replied. Because this is the only time I'm going to explain myself. He chuckled. You don't have much leverage here. That's where you're wrong, I said. You and Lauren made one assumption, that I'd react emotionally, that I'd panic, that I'd lash out. Silence on the line now. I didn't, I continued. I documented. I archived. I involved professionals. And every time you escalated, you left fingerprints. I could hear his breathing change. Subtle, controlled, but no longer relaxed. You're threatening me? He asked. No, I said. I'm informing you. He lowered his voice. You think anyone will believe you over us? I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. I don't need them to believe me, I said. I just need them to look. I hung up before he could respond. That night, I slept for the first time in weeks. Because once someone shows you they're willing to destroy you quietly, you stop negotiating. You start finishing. The turning point didn't come with a dramatic confrontation or a surprise knock at the door. It came quietly, in an email attachment labeled Supplemental Financial Review. My attorney had warned me this would happen, that once discovery officially started, people who thought they were careful would suddenly realize how sloppy they'd been. You can hide an affair. You can even hide money for a while. What you can't hide is patterns. And Lauren loved patterns. Buried in transaction logs was the mistake that changed everything. Mark's firm had paid Lauren through a consulting LLC that didn't just overlap with our joint accounts. It intersected with a property deal Mark had sworn, in sworn filings, that Lauren had no involvement in. That wasn't infidelity anymore. That was fraud. Worse, my name appeared on 2 documents as a secondary authorization. Forged signatures. Bad ones. The kind someone rushes when they're confident no one will ever look closely. I remember staring at the screen, feeling the air go thin around me. If I'd signed the papers they sent earlier, if I'd panicked, tried to be reasonable, tried to save face, I could have taken the fall for all of it. Lauren hadn't just tried to erase me. She'd positioned me as the exit liability. I forwarded everything to my attorney with one line. Is this what I think it is? He called immediately. Yes, he said. And it's worse than you realize. Because once fraud enters the picture, lawyers stop posturing and start distancing themselves. Mark's expensive confidence, built on the assumption that Lauren's role would stay invisible. She didn't, and neither did the forged signatures. Lauren called me that night for the first time since the confrontation. Not a text, not a threat, a call. She sounded different, tight, controlled in a way that felt rehearsed under pressure. We need to talk, she said. Privately. No, I replied. We've done enough private talking. You don't understand what you're holding, she said. This could ruin lives. I almost laughed. You already tried to ruin mine, I said. This just changes who's standing in front of the blast. Her voice cracked then, just for a second. Mark said you wouldn't notice, she whispered. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else. Not I'm sorry. Not I messed up. Just that. He underestimated you, she added quickly, like she could still sell the narrative. We both did. I told her something I'd been holding back for days. I know you forged my name, I said. I know where the money went. And I know when it started. Silence. Then, very quietly, you can't prove intent. I smiled to myself. Lauren, I said, intent is written all over your exit plan. She started crying then. Real crying. Or maybe just fear finally breaking through the arrogance. Please, she said. If this goes further, Mark will burn everything down. I believed her, but not the way she meant. Then you should have thought about that before you tried to use me as cover, I replied. I hung up before she could say anything else. That night, I realized something heavy but clarifying. Justice doesn't feel like victory. It feels like gravity finally turning on. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It happened in layers, quiet withdrawals, sudden silences, people who used to return Mark's calls suddenly in meetings. Power doesn't disappear with a bang. It leaks. Mark's firm issued a bland internal memo about ongoing compliance reviews. Translation: someone higher up had started asking questions, and the answers weren't lining up. Lauren noticed it before I did. She showed up at the house again, uninvited, 3 weeks after her last visit. No confidence this time. No tailored jacket. Just sweatpants, red eyes, and the look of someone who'd been running out of options for days. They cut me off, she said the moment I opened the door. The accounts. Everything. Mark won't answer my calls. I stepped aside and let her in, not out of sympathy, but curiosity. There's a moment when people realize the story they were telling themselves no longer works. I wanted to see it happen up close. She paced the living room like it was a cage. He says it's temporary, she went on. That his lawyers are handling it. But people are backing away, Ethan. I can feel it. I sat down. You built your exit around him, I said. What did you think would happen if he became radioactive? She stopped pacing, looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. You wanted this, she said suddenly. Accusatory. Desperate. You wanted me to fail. No, I replied calmly. I wanted the truth to stop being optional. She laughed then, sharp, ugly. You think you're some hero now? She snapped. You think this makes you better than me? I looked at her for a long moment before answering. No, I said. It just makes me awake. That's when she finally broke. She sat down across from me and buried her face in her hands. When she looked up, her voice was small. He told me you were weak, she said. That men like you don't fight back. That you'd be grateful I didn't destroy you completely. There it was. The final confirmation. You let him talk you into treating me like collateral, I said. She nodded, tears running now. I didn't think you'd survive this, she whispered. That hurt more than anything else she'd done. Not the cheating, not the lies. That she'd written me off as something disposable. Get a lawyer, I told her. Not Mark's. Yours. She looked at me in panic. Are you pressing charges? I'm cooperating with an investigation, I said. What happens after that isn't up to me anymore. She stood, unsteady. I never meant for it to go this far, she said. That's the thing about plans, I replied. They don't care what you meant. She left without asking to stay. The house felt different after she was gone. Lighter, like it had exhaled something poisonous. A week later, I got the call. Mark Reynolds had been placed on administrative leave pending a formal inquiry. Federal agencies were involved now. Words like wire fraud and conspiracy were being whispered in rooms I'd never be allowed into. And Lauren? She texted me one sentence that night. I don't know who I am without him. I didn't respond. Lauren started unraveling in ways I hadn't expected, and in some ways, exactly the way I had. When your sense of self is borrowed from someone else's power, it collapses the moment that power disappears. She'd spent months seeing herself through Mark's eyes. Desirable, protected, elevated. Without him, she wasn't just alone, she was undefined. She began emailing me instead of texting. Long messages. Rambling. Full of contradictions. One night, she wrote that she hated Mark. The next, that she missed him. Then that she hated herself for missing him. She said she felt used. That she'd been manipulated. That she didn't recognize the woman who made those choices. I read every word. I didn't reply to any of them. Not out of cruelty, but because I finally understood something important. Responding would give her a mirror. And she didn't need one. She needed to sit with the version of herself she'd tried so hard to avoid. Meanwhile, the investigation moved forward with mechanical precision. Subpoenas, requests, deadlines. I was interviewed twice. Comm rooms, neutral faces. No drama, just facts. The strangest part? No one treated me like a victim. They treated me like a witness. And that felt right. Lauren called me late one night. I almost didn't answer. Almost. I'm scared, she said immediately. No greeting. No pretense. I can't sleep. Every time my phone buzzes, I think it's bad news. That's what uncertainty feels like, I replied. She was quiet for a long moment. Did you ever love me? She asked. That question landed harder than any accusation. Yes, I said. Completely. Then how can you be so cold now? I took a breath. Because the man who loved you believed you were someone else, I said. And that man doesn't exist anymore. She started crying again. Not the sharp, defensive crying. The empty kind. I thought Mark made me stronger, she said. I thought choosing him meant choosing myself. And now? I asked. And now I don't know who I am, she whispered. I closed my eyes. That's not my fault, I said gently. But it is your responsibility. She didn't argue. For the first time in months, she didn't try to rewrite the story. A few days later, I heard through my attorney that Lauren had been formally separated from Mark's legal team. Conflict of interest. Translation, no one wanted to be standing next to her when the lights fully came on. She sent one last email. I see now that I didn't just betray you. I erased myself trying to become someone else. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know I finally understand the damage. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I archived the email. Because understanding doesn't undo consequences. The resolution didn't arrive the way movies teach us to expect it. No courtroom showdown. No dramatic confession. No moment where everyone suddenly understood how right I'd been all along. It arrived in paperwork. Thick envelopes. Formal language. Words like settlement, liability, cooperation agreement. The kind of words that don't care how anyone feels. Mark Reynolds resigned before he was officially charged. His firm released a carefully sanitized statement about personal matters and organizational restructuring. Behind the scenes, it was uglier. Assets frozen. Partners distancing themselves. Lawyers negotiating terms designed to keep certain doors closed and certain names out of headlines. Lauren was offered a choice: full cooperation or shared exposure. She chose cooperation. I didn't hear that from her. I heard it from my attorney, who said it like someone discussing the weather. She's giving them everything, he told me. Emails, timelines, conversations, including ones about you. I nodded, unsurprised. Of course she was. Lauren had always survived by aligning herself with whoever had the most leverage in the room. This time, that wasn't Mark. And it wasn't me either. It was the truth. The divorce finalized quietly. No alimony. Clean separation. The judge barely looked at us. To him, we were just another case number, two people who'd failed at something millions of others fail at every year. Lauren looked smaller across the room. Not physically, internally, like someone whose voice had been turned down and never turned back up. When we signed the last document, she whispered, "I never thought you'd win." I didn't look at her. This was never a competition, I said. It was an escape. That night, I went back to the house alone, walked through the rooms, touched the walls, opened the windows. For the first time since this began, I felt something close to relief, not because they'd lost, but because I no longer needed to watch my back. Justice, I learned, isn't loud. It's the moment you stop bracing for impact. I won't pretend it feels like victory. The nights are quieter now, but that's not the same as peace. Peace is earned slowly. It's built in the small choices you make after someone who was supposed to love you betrays everything. I learned that betrayal isn't just about sex, lies, or money. It's about trust, identity, and the illusion of control. Lauren didn't just cheat on me. She tried to rewrite reality, rearrange the narrative, make me small while elevating herself. And Mark? He thought intimidation and money could replace courage and truth. They were both wrong. I rebuilt what mattered. I reclaimed control of my finances. I documented everything. I strengthened relationships with friends and family I'd let drift. I stopped looking for excuses to forgive and started looking for ways to move forward. There's no satisfaction in revenge if it keeps you chained to the past. The real victory is living deliberately. I still think about Lauren sometimes. Not with anger, not with longing, just as a lesson in human nature. How charm, manipulation, and rehearsed confidence can fool even the most attentive person. But I also think about myself. About how quietly, methodically, I observed, documented, and reclaimed my life. How patience became my weapon. How clarity became my shield.